this might seem like your typical runaway story. I know that in many of the stories I've read and heard, the parents are asses or something, and that causes the kid to run away from home. This was pretty much the same for me. I never really liked my family very much. My teenage years were pretty much a nightmare, but what happened to me when I left was a much worse nightmare. I was 16 years old at the time, and I had just gotten into a huge fight with my parents. Again, this wasn't particularly unusual, but the fight got physical, and my father, who was a huge man, was beating the hell out of me. I had finally had enough of him, and when he knocked me over, I grabbed a lamp, hauled off, and hit him upside the head, knocking him silly. I then told him that if he ever hit me again, I would kill him. I didn't want to give him the chance, though. I went to my room, put the things that mattered into my backpack, went out to my motorcycle, and left. On that very first drive, I drove really far away. I had some money from a part-time job I had had for years, so I wasn't completely out of resources, but I also didn't feel like just blowing my money on things I didn't need. I had a very good friend named Jack who lived in his parents' basement, and I went to see if I could spend the night there. Jack was agreeable. I mean, I had spent the night at his place plenty of times before, but he did have company. There was a girl there, and apparently she had sold Jack a lot of weed, so we had a pretty nice time. All three of us got very high, had a lot of snacks, and eventually fell asleep. The following day, we all three kept hanging out. We smoked more of the weed, and I got to talking more to the girl, Mandy. She was pretty cool, and she wasn't Jack's girlfriend. He also had no interest in her, and told me I could pursue her if I wanted. We really just spent a lot of time talking and smoking more weed. Late into the following night, Mandy asked me if I would like to try something a little stronger. I told her, hell yeah. She asked if I wanted to go to her place, and I was keen on the idea. Jack had brought her there, so I had to take her on my motorcycle. She was really touchy-feely while riding behind me, and I seriously began to think I might be getting some. Mandy took me into the hills. We lived in a fairly rural area, but I really didn't go this far out into the country too often. I didn't like riding my motorcycle down all these dirt roads. Also at night, it was weird riding on these roads. They were small with woods on each side of them, and it was just really creepy. I always felt like I was being watched, or like something could jump out of the woods at any time. You know, I'm sure being in a car would have felt much better. Eventually, however, we came upon her driveway. It was short and led into a really old but big house. We rode up and I parked the bike. I walked behind Mandy right up to the house. There were no lights on, and the house looked very foreboding. She opened the door and walked right in. I was wondering when she was going to turn on the light. I stood there in the doorway as she walked over to the front hallway. There was a small lamp on the table. She turned it on, and it emitted a very faint light, but it showed me something. I saw the very big shadow of a man standing at the far end of the hallway. I couldn't make out features, but I could see that he was carrying some sort of weapon. Frightened, I stepped backward. I then heard a noise and turned to look behind me. I looked just in time to see another man, whose features I couldn't make out in the dark, coming up from behind. He grabbed me and held a knife up to my neck. Before I could do a single thing, the man sliced into me below my neck. The other guy from inside the house had advanced on me, and he stabbed me in the chest. Then he stabbed me 2 more times, before the man in the back knocked me to the ground. Mandy searched through my pockets, found my wallet and all of my money. The 3 jerks then left, got into a car and drove off, leaving me for dead. What I was able to do next, I think nothing short of a miracle. I was covered in blood. I was in complete and utter agony, but I guess my survival instinct kicked in. I was somehow able to force myself to get up and onto my motorcycle. It was hell to try and get it started, but it was worse to get it going. I rode out as best as I could down the driveway, down the dirt road until I stumbled on the first house and driveway I'd come across. I drove up, crashing my bike into the front of the house. An elderly man came out with a shotgun, but once he saw me there covered in blood, he called for his wife to call an ambulance. Long story short, I survived thanks to these 2 people. The police caught Mandy, who was brought up on charges of assault and attempted murder. The two guys, though, had taken the money and beaten her down. They didn't stab her, though. Still, she had to go to the hospital, and that was where she got caught. She refused to identify them, and I couldn't because I hadn't seen them well enough. Mandy, when she was stabilized, went to jail for a long time. I went to live with my aunt, whom I stayed with until I went to college. I still have some pretty gnarly scars that girls always ask about when we get intimate. I don't know. I don't like telling the story because it sucks to relive the memory of the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I ran away from home once. I was really young, too. I was only 10 years old, actually. You know, I was too young to really understand what running away was. What I do know, though, is that I always had issues with my dad. I guess I was a mama's boy, but also, being a middle child, it seemed like he treated me badly. I wasn't the oldest, and I wasn't the baby either. It was just blatantly unfair and painful. In fact, my older brother would often do things, then blame them on me. My dad would always take his side for no other reason than he was the obvious favorite child. The day that this happened, I was in my bedroom. I was called down by my dad, who sounded very angry. When I went down, he told me that $5 were missing from his wallet. He demanded the money back. I told him I hadn't taken the money from him, but he just wouldn't believe me. Obviously, my older brother had taken it, and then told my dad it was me. I insisted over and over that I didn't do anything. My dad grabbed my arm, held me at arm's length, and hit me on the butt 10 times, really hard. He then sent me to my room and told me I couldn't have dinner. I immediately went to my room and fell on my bed crying. I was hurting physically, but it hurt way more emotionally. I was tired of always being blamed and treated this way. I decided then that I was going to run away, and keep in mind I was still very young and didn't really understand the difficulty that such a thing would entail. I simply got a small blanket, wrapped my teddy bear up in it, and hung it from my baseball bat so I looked like a classic hobo. I then climbed out my window. I determined I would never see my family again. I walked through the backs of the houses so my neighbors wouldn't see me. Eventually, I got out of my neighborhood. It's weird how not a lot of people paid attention to me. I mean, I was a 10-year-old kid carrying a bear on a bat, but no one really ever said anything. What ended up affecting me the most was that I didn't expect to come down from the anger, but it did. I had been going for about 2 or 3 hours, just walking, before I realized suddenly that I had no idea where I was. I decided I wanted to go back home and just deal with being treated like crap. At least I would have my room in which to do it. The problem was that I had walked so far away that I had gotten lost. I had no idea where I was, or what way I even had to go to get back, and I didn't know how I could ask anyone to help me. Eventually the frustration got to me, and I started crying. I didn't know what to do. It was then that I felt someone touch me on the shoulder. Looking around, I saw a large man standing behind me. I was scared at first, but he seemed rather kind. He asked me gently why I was crying. I knew that I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers, but I figured that if I talked to him, he might be able to help me get home. I explained my situation to him. He asked if I knew my home phone number and offered to call my parents for me. I was happy and grateful and followed him to his house. I hoped he would call my parents right away, but he didn't. He asked me if I needed something to eat or to take a nap. I told him I was tired, but I really just wanted to go home. He insisted it would be better if I took a nap first. I kept begging him to call my parents, and I began crying again. The man visibly got angry with me. He grabbed me roughly by the arm and told me I was going to take a nap. He then pulled me roughly behind him. I tried to resist, but I was unable to. I kept crying and bawling, and he began taunting me, calling me a baby. He dragged me into a dark room, and I was terrified to see that it was like a nursery with a crib. This part is hard to tell, so bear with me. The man forcibly removed my clothing and put me in a diaper. He told me that if I was going to act like a baby, he was going to treat me like one. I had a feeling he had planned this out beforehand when he'd seen me crying, but I was terrified, not sure what was going to happen. The man obviously had a temper, and I really felt like I was in danger. While he was forcing me into the crib, I heard a knocking at the door. The man told me to be quiet and threatened my life if I didn't. He went and answered, and thank God, it was the police. Apparently a neighbor who knew the man had a criminal past had seen him taking me into the home. I heard the man deny it at first, and then I heard a struggle. The next thing I knew, an officer came into the room. I was embarrassed, being in a crib and a diaper, but I was happy. The officer let me change my clothes before he took me to the police station. My parents came and were crying, wondering why I'd run away. I was too happy to care to mention it, though. My parents brought me home, and treated me a lot better after that for a while. The man who took me into the home was convicted on kidnapping charges. Apparently he had served time for this before, so he got a rather long sentence. In fact, he's still in jail today. My running away was not something that was spontaneous. In fact, I had it all planned out. I wanted to run off to Hollywood and get a job as an actor. I'd acted in high school, and I was sure I would be able to make it there in Hollywood. I got a part-time job, saved up every paycheck, and made sure I had a nice wad of money before I headed out. I bought myself a Greyhound ticket to California, and I was sure there was fortune there waiting for me. Well, first, riding a Greyhound bus is a horror in itself, honestly. It took 4 days to get to California. I couldn't really sleep on the bus either, so by the time we got there I was completely exhausted. Getting off the bus, I didn't feel as good as I hoped I would. Honestly, I just wanted to find somewhere to sleep. That was my first problem. I couldn't get a hotel room because I was only 17 years old. I tried several places, but was unable to get any of them to give me a room. I felt like I was going to die. It didn't make sense to me because I had the money. After looking and looking for a room, I made an awful decision. I went and found a rather dry alley. I found a little nook and tried to sleep in it. I wasn't sure how long I had fell asleep before I felt someone tugging on my arm. Looking up, there were 2 street punks standing over me. One was a girl and the other a guy. They looked pretty dirty as well, so I figured they must have been homeless. I was frightened at first, but they were just telling me that if I needed a place to sleep, there was a house that a bunch of kids were squatting at nearby. They'd be happy to help me out, for some money, of course. I figured that if I was going to pay for a hotel room anyway, I might as well just give them a bit of money. They happily led me to an old boarded-up house, and we broke into it. I wasn't sure what to think. It was like something out of a horror movie. There were quite a bit of people in the house. They were all gathered into groups, though. Many of them looked at me, but didn't seem to pay me any mind. The 2 punks I was with had a room that had a couple of mattresses lying on the floor. They told me they kept this room, and I could go ahead and sleep on one of the mattresses. I was so happy. I was finally going to get some sleep, and I didn't care that it was on an old mattress in a squatting home. They gave me something to drink, too, which was awesome, and I downed it fast. I immediately plopped down onto one of the mattresses and fell asleep. I woke up a bit later, and no one was in the room with me. I felt awful and was having a hard time breathing. The world was sort of unreal around me, but I know that I felt sick and was having breathing issues. Although I was weak feeling, I still managed to get up and stumble around. I fished around for my wallet and couldn't find it. I didn't worry about it, though. I did my best to make it out of the house, even though it was a strenuous and hard task. There were others in the house still, but they were all either asleep or passed out. I managed to not only get out of the house, but stumble out onto the street. I can't tell you how hard all of this was, because I had breathing issues. I stumbled into a diner and tried to tell the host to call me an ambulance because of my breathing, but I suddenly passed out. I woke up later in a hospital. The punks that had picked me up had stolen my wallet, which stupidly had all of my money in as cash. They had taken my belongings from my bag as well. For some reason, they had drugged my drink enough that they likely thought it would cause an overdose, and it did. Luckily, I didn't die from it, though. The hospital didn't have my ID, and therefore called my parents. Once I was stabilized, I was released from the hospital, and immediately found a homeless shelter. I was determined that despite the difficulty of my experience, I would rebuild my life. The shelter had a room full of cots, and it was nice to get some sleep. However, on the very first night sleeping there, something woke me up. I opened my eyes to see the male punk that had taken me to the house and drugged me. He was standing over me with a knife. "I thought you were dead, you little fucker," he whispered to me. I immediately began screaming, thinking the guy was going to try and kill me. The screaming woke up several people in the room with me, and they saw what was going on. The punk tried to run, but he was caught quickly by a worker. He was arrested for aggravated assault for holding the knife over me. Unfortunately, there was no evidence he had drugged me, so he didn't get charged with that. Even though he was gone, please don't think that I went back home or anything. That seems to be the way of many stories like this. I remained in California, living in the shelter. Eventually, I got a job, not as an actor, and got an apartment. I kept upgrading, and now work a decent 9-to-5 job and have a nice apartment in West Hollywood. But I'll never forget the awful experience I had when I ran away from home. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. All the copyright strikes are removed now, so we can get back to business as usual. I'm sorry I haven't been posting as much lately. I've just been really distracted with Monster Hunter Rise, I'll say. But I will get back to posting normally as soon as possible. Thanks to my friend KillerOrangeCat for letting me use the stories from his subreddit in this video. He's been helping me a lot by letting me use some of his stories lately. So be sure to check him out. I'll leave a link to his stuff in the description. And he does really good scary stories as well. They're all really unique, and most of them are original because he gets them himself personally through doing interviews and stuff. So if you guys would like to send in a story, or you have a story you'd like me to read, links to all of my social media will be in the description below, including links to my Gmail, Facebook, and Twitter accounts. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, the type of story it is, if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious about the art used in this video, I have links to my artist friend in the description below. He makes really good stuff and he does commissions, so be sure to check him out if you like his stuff. And as always, links to the music used in the video will also be in the description in the order which it appears in. Thank you guys so much for watching. Not too many updates this time. And I hope you guys have a great day.